Welcome to the New England Football Show presented by Mortgage Right. I'm your host, John Saranitas. And as always, I'm joined by my partner, Kevin Stone. And tonight we have the good fortune to be joined by Boston Sports Journal's Mike Giardi. Mike, great to see you, my friend.
Good to see you guys as always. Got to bump into each other today at that press conference. So it was nice.
It's always nice to see you, and that was nice. And I think we'd all agree, a little bit of a different vibe than what we saw a year ago when Jerod Mayo was hired. Is that safe to say?
Yeah, I mean it felt like we had a football guy talking about football, and not necessarily delving into too many specifics, but enough to make you feel like, oh, this is what a head coach is supposed to be. This is like, to a certain degree what we're used to in the past with Bill. Obviously, they tried something with Gerard, and for a lot of different reasons, it didn't work. But this certainly felt like a little bit of a return to normalcy, and as I think I've been talking about and writing in the last week or so, it just feels like a chance for them to become relevant again. The last couple of years has been, the disaster. 4-13 followed by 4-13, dysfunction 2 years ago, dysfunction this year, and now all of a sudden it feels like, okay, they're finally moving it back in the right direction. And there's a long way to go, obviously, before we can discuss what it's going to be like and how good the team can be, but at least you get the feeling like this guy's done this before, and it feels like he has an idea of how he wants to go about building this thing back up again.
And before we get started, I do want to remind you that we are brought to you by Mortgage Right. If you're in the market to sell your current home, purchase your first home, or refinance, give our good friend Herb Devine a call, 781-254-2846. You can also shoot him an email at herb@mortgageright.com. He and his team are available anytime, including nights and weekends. Kevin, go ahead.
Mike, overall, the past, whatever it is, week or so, people talking about, being worried that this is a Patriots retread. I don't think it is. I think you feel the same way, and a lot of people feel the same way. But I thought today, his answer talking about him not being Bill Belichick and not being Bill Cowher, I thought that was very important. Just your thoughts on that answer and the idea of this not being a retread.
Well, it's interesting, right? Because I think some of the things that we heard from him today take you back to what you heard from Bill for all those years, or would take you back to someone like Cowher and sort of the things that they preach. He has a foundation, which I think he learned as a player under those guys, particularly Bill, where he experienced most of his success as a player. But then he's different. He's not Bill. There's a playfulness to Mike that we never really got to see with Vrabel. I mean, with Belichick, maybe on the rarest of occasions. But there's also a distinct way in which he reaches the players. And that's one of the things that really stood out to me for my time covering the Titans at the NFL Network. And I spent a lot of time down there because they were a good team and the Patriots sort of were starting to fall off at that point. And just you talk to the players and you can always find guys that, I don't like this guy. He's too much, this, that, and the other thing. But by and large, even though he's a hard guy to play for because he demands certain things, that those guys embraced him and what he brought to the table. And there's an incredible amount of loyalty that, obviously you talk to former Patriots about Belichick, especially the ones that went through the glory years and won titles. And it's, Bill, blah, 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 but I got these rings and he made me be a better player. I think you get some of the same thing from the Titans, minus, of course, the rings. They didn't win any of those, but there's definitely a distinct way that he reaches the players that I don't think Bill definitely did over the last few years. And I'm not sure that Bill ever truly did in New England, because I don't think that's not his personality. It's certainly definitely not the way he was brought up in football. As Mike talked about today, Kevin, the idea that it's changing. The athlete has changed. We've talked about this over the last 5 to 10 years about they want to know why. And now you have the NIL, which Mike sort of went into a little bit too today, about guys who are at a school for 6 months and then at the next school. Half the time, you're not even sure which school they were at. You've got to do all this homework instead of, Mike Vrabel played at Ohio State and talked to this guy and this guy. They coached him. And that's that. Now it's, this quarterback played for 3 teams in 3 years. This running back was at 4 schools in 5 years. Some guys are playing 6 and 7 years in college now because of the COVID stuff that happened. So it's definitely different, but I do like the fact, and I think it's one of the things that really, I think we felt all along that this is where it was going to go, but in talking to those people and being reminded of just sort of the loyalty that they have to Mike and the way that he was able to reach them really stood out to me.
Mike, I do want to go backwards for a sec before we continue the conversation about Vrabel, and I want to talk a little bit about Jerod Mayo, the year he was here. Of course, you were front and center the last couple weeks in regards to his future with the Patriots, and obviously, I think we were all surprised at how quickly it happened after that Bills game last Sunday. But you had, like I said, you were front and center. You were talking about it 2, 3, 4 days in advance. Just some thoughts on Mayo's tenure. And why ultimately do you believe that Robert Kraft chose to move on?
I think to start with the latter, I think he moved on for kind of what he said, that he looked at it and he wasn't really sure that there was a direction. And certainly, I think, and we all talked about this for months, really, but the idea that, like, where did they get better? What things did he solve during his time here? And look, I still am going to say, and whatever, people can call me an apologist. I think it was unfair. Like, some of what happened to him was unfair. I think he was set up in many ways to fail. And I think when you talk about what went wrong and what went wrong here in the last year in particular, I think you have to start with ownership. Robert trusted his gut, and he said his gut's been right on a lot of things, and I can't deny it. They've had a ton of success. He seems like he's happily married, all these things that he trusted his gut with. That said, they put a guy in position who had never even been a coordinator and had been a position coach and maybe helped to kind of undermine Belichick's last season as well. And it it had vision, but the vision was far from being realized when he had to take the throne, and it never got better. It goes beyond, I think, the verbal missteps that we obviously chronicled in the media week after week, and the walk it back Wednesdays or walk it back Mondays, whatever the things were. It was sort of the messaging to the players behind the scenes too, the inconsistency. One day we're doing this, the next we're doing something else, and it's like, well, wait, we just practiced this, or you just told us this was a touchstone for us this week, and now the next day you're changing it. And I think it just sort of led to the dysfunction you saw. And then obviously, to me, I think it was a huge alarm bells with the 40-7 loss to the Chargers and the way the fans made themselves heard. And I know there are people over there who were there, who are there now, that think the media contributed mightily to Jerod being unseated. And I would say the people of this region are pretty freaking smart, and they've seen what good football is all about. They've seen what complimentary football is all about. They watched it for the better part of 20 years. And what they saw was what we were telling them we were seeing too. They were like,
Right.
we might have more insight because we're in the locker room where you're talking to guys off the record or on the record or what have you, but they saw the product, and the product wasn't good. And oh yeah, you played Buffalo tough the week before, but then you did what you did in the second half all year long. You sort of just unraveled. And where are the adjustments? Where's the improvement? And I just think that lasting image of the Fire Mayo chants, I think ownership listens to a lot of what's said both on programs like this, radio, and their fan base. And I think their fan base was heard loud and clear in that moment.
And I don't think the empty seats helped. I mean, let's be
No,
honest.
no. I
You
mean,
go back
and
to
this is
that.
right. And John, this is 2 years in a row, right? Like at the end of Bill's tenure, it was like there was apathy to it. I mean, I know it was a miserable day, his final game, but most people assumed, and Tom Curran reported weeks in advance, that Bill was done. And 30,000 people showed up for that final game at Gillette. Like, I mean, another one, I felt bad then. I was like, man, if for this guy, that's how it's going to end. I mean, I know it never really ends the way you want it to, but it was like that sort of apathy to the end of his reign, and then sort of the apathy that you saw with the Patriots over the last, whatever, 4 to 6 weeks was pretty stark.
Mike, I thought just tone and tenor today felt much different than the Mayo press conference last year. And it's something very, very small, but it bothered me the entire year, basically since the press conference happened. And it was Jerod Mayo showing up in a t-shirt and a blazer. And I know it's just something minor, but you see Vrabel up there with the shirt and tie today, just kind of presenting himself differently. Do you think that matters? I feel like it does, just in terms of, again, the outside perspective.
I think certainly in messaging, and I think certainly in messaging to the older fan base, right? The season ticket holders that have been around for a while, and it's just a certain thing that you come to expect. And maybe the newer generation doesn't feel that way, that the t-shirt is fine and that's the look and that's the style. and I'm just lazy now. I wear the t-shirt under the blazer a lot because I just don't feel like putting on a dress shirt and a tie anymore.
That's life in your 50s, Mike. I can
Well,
relate.
exactly. And now I'm not being paid to necessarily have to wear that every day. So I'll sign up for that any day of the week, at least that part of it, right? So I definitely think that there's no harm in doing that. In fact, there's probably a positive effect, as you said. And I think to that sort of the older fan base, like, no, this is how a leader is supposed to present. This is the first time. Now, look, when he presents to the team the first time, he's probably going to be in shorts and a t-shirt. Doesn't matter. Different time, different place, different scenario. And really all that matters then is, can he reach them in a sort of similar manner that I think he was able to reach fans today? Because very few, we get some comments here and there about, I don't know, but by and large, I think the press conference was incredibly well received.
Obviously a big theme to Mayo's tenure was collaboration and how things were going to be different. And the way I interpreted that, Mike, at least in the beginning, was that they just wanted anything but Belichick at that point. It was about just going in the opposite direction and being as anti-Belichick as you can be. And let's be honest, they went 4-13 for the second straight year. It didn't work. Mm-hmm. How do you think things will change under Vrabel in that regard? I mean, you get the sense that he's going to obviously have some say over the final 53-man roster. He's going to be involved on the personnel side in the front office. How different do you think is it going to be than this collaboration first approach that we saw with Jerod Mayo and Elliott Wolf?
I think ownership would still like some collaboration, and I think that's in part, why you're continuing to hear the idea that Elliott's going to be around and not just, through the draft, that this might be something longer. But I would say, if you look at Mike's past history in Tennessee and how it unraveled there, I think part of it was how are the decisions being made? And then, of course, in the end, having Rand Carthon, the GM, foisted upon him in sort of an arranged marriage when Mike clearly didn't feel, and there were other people in that building in football that didn't feel like Rand was ready for the role yet. So, like, you want to bring on Rand? Fine. Maybe he's an assistant GM right now and you groom him to be something more than that a couple years down the road. But all of a sudden to give him the keys and say, no, you two guys are operating on sort of an even playing field. I mean, look, they fired him a year later. I don't know that Mike's going to celebrate anybody getting fired, but I'm sure he was probably like, duh. I told you it was going to happen. So I can't imagine that he entered this situation without knowing exactly sort of who he answers to and who has say on what coming into it. And my strong belief is that he has a considerable amount of sway into how they're going to go going forward. And I think, look, if you're the Crafts and you did something for 20 something years and you had all this great success, and granted Tom Brady was the quarterback too, and there were a lot of Hall of Fame players that came through here, and Bill got more and more power as it went along, that you probably look at that model now and say, okay, we still want to have some checks and balances, maybe more than we had in place, especially over Bill's last 5 to 10 years. But the guy has a vision for what he wants to do. And there's no point in bringing that guy in and paying him 8 figures a year and then not letting him exert his influence strongly over the organization.
Sticking with the theme, what do you make of Elliott Wolf's name being said? I believe the final count was 37 times today. Is that just sort of playing nice for the Crafts right now, or does he legitimately want to build a relationship? Because 37 times is a lot.
So if Elliott's under contract for another year, we know that, the Crafts are now eating Jerod Mayo's contract and probably a couple others on the coaching staff that were married to him, at least in a shorter term fashion than Gerod's lengthier deal. Then, yeah, I think when you talk to people around the league, there's still a belief that Elliott's a really smart football guy who knows his stuff, and he's just good. He's good with people. He's good at scouting. It just, obviously, the example of the last 11 months is not something that he wants to put front and center on his resume, at least not yet. You can always talk about the draft and needing, 2-3 years to at least evaluate what it is. So there's still an opportunity for a lot of the guys that we didn't see much of or certainly underperformed as rookies to grow and get better. there are some people in the front office will tell you if they had better coaching this year, that you would have seen more progress there. So there's that part of it as well. And now, obviously, in hiring someone like Vrabel, they feel like, oh, we have a chance now to develop our guys. In terms of how many times he mentioned it, it did seem a little bit over the top. I think Mike was definitely playing nice, but I think Mike is probably under the understanding that Elliott's not going anywhere anytime soon. So to come out and, already start sort of a, back and forth there doesn't really make a lot of sense. I think he handled it the way you should handle it. And there'll be a lot of conversations between those two guys. And as he mentioned, Elliott's people over the next week, month, couple months, 3 months, whatever, as you get ready through free agency and the draft. But that I think is going to be an interesting relationship to watch, especially now as it appears Ryan Cowden is definitely going to join the staff. And that's the guy that obviously Mike wanted attached with him last year had he gotten a head coaching job.
How much does Ryan Cowden joining this front office change the front office itself, Mike? Because you'd have to think, at least after the draft, that there's going to be some changes to this front office. I mean, you got to figure a couple of familiar names could, and I'm trying to speculate here, but you'd have to think a couple of familiar names could be moving on after the draft.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assumption to make. And again, if not this year, depending on contractual situations, definitely next year. Cowden obviously gives Vrabel, some eyes and ears in the building, in that part of the building. But Mike's a smart guy. And again, as he's been through sort of some of the changes with John Robinson and then going to the interim and then hiring Rand, I think he started to learn how this thing happens behind the scenes too, and how to navigate that. So it's definitely something that I don't know that they necessarily have married it up perfectly. I think that the smartest thing to do, it's kind of what you're seeing the Raiders do. I can't believe I'm saying the Raiders and smart in the same thing, but hey, if we're blowing out the coach, why are we keeping the GM? You need them on the same timetable. You need them to be working as one. You don't already need to, I had, Tom Telesco could say, I had a good draft, Pierce couldn't coach him. Then the new guy comes in and says, well, yeah, but I wouldn't have drafted Blake Bauer or whatever, Brock Bowers, not that he would say that, but whatever, you know what I'm saying? Sort of the idea of well, no, but those aren't my players. You pick the players, but I need this kind of player. And it's always best to just get everybody together, I find, or you end up doing what we saw in the division for 20 plus years, right? Which was the Bills and the Jets and the Dolphins constantly on different cycles. GM's fired this year, coach next year. Coach this year, GM 2 years from now. And it was always constantly then the new coach would come in and say, well, I don't have my players. I need 3 more years till I get all my guys in here. Or the GM would say, this roster stunk and I got to, that's not what the style we want to play. And I got to get this in. And then you foisted the coach on me. So now I got to get rid of the coach. And now the coach needs 3. It's the constant moving of the goalposts. And that's where, that's something to watch because you don't necessarily have the perfect cohesion that you'd like at the start of a regime.
Mike, other Mike is clearly a ball buster. You've covered him as a player and as a coach. Clearly, Jerod Mayo couldn't walk that line between being friends and being a coach. What makes Vrabel, what gives him the ability to still be that ball buster, but for guys to respect him as a coach as well?
Well, now he's got a little bit of a track record, obviously, which Jerod didn't have any track record. He can say, hey, my second year in the league, we went to the AFC Championship game. My third year, we were 11-5. My fourth year, we were 12-5. We used a league high 91 players. That's a league record. And we had the number 1 seed. And granted, they lost their first playoff game. So that still sort of hangs on him a little bit. But I've proven we can do this. And then I think players are smart. I mean, I talked to one of the players, whatever day that was, Sunday. And it was I did my scouting. I know he can be an a-hole. But if this year proved anything to me, and it should have proved to everybody, that we kind of need an a-hole, that there are too many guys in the locker room that A, don't know how to be pros, or B, don't know how to win. And this guy, he was a pro. He was a damn good pro for 15 years. And then he, got a program that was middling and ended up turning into one of the tougher teams in the AFC East. I'll give you another one. I happened to catch a Buffalo Bills front office guy shortly before their game, about 10:30, 11 o'clock in the morning. And he was changes things a little bit, the division now, because you didn't know what you were going to get out of Mayo's teams. You didn't know the kind of consistency. Now it's there'll be an identity. There'll be a toughness there. Like, these are things that are, as he said today, they're non-negotiable, right? The effort, the finish, those are the things that you're going to see out of my team. And we might not be as talented as you, especially as they make the transition here in year one. But we're going to show up and we're going to play, and we're going to play our ass off. And if you don't want to play your ass off, then you'll go sit next to me and someone else will go in there. And if you want to do it again, then you're probably going to be on the waiver wire and we'll find someone else to do it. And that's just sort of the idea of, and again, this kind of goes back to the Belichick thing. Like, okay, you earn your opportunities, dude. You're good enough to get out in the field. You show us that you can do it, then you get a little bit more, then you get a little bit more. I think he was able to foster those relationships there. And like Derrick Henry telling me basically, dude, when we went south, it wasn't because of the coaches. It was because of the players. We didn't deliver. We weren't performing like we had been coached to perform for whatever reason, injuries, lack, whatever it is, we didn't have it then. Don't look at him so much as look at us. We didn't deliver what we were being paid to do.
Mike, it's interesting because yesterday on ESPN Countdown, Teddy Bruschi shared his thoughts on Vrabel getting the job. Of course, the news broke while they were on the air, and I thought he made a pretty interesting point in comparing Vrabel to Bill Parcells. And when you think about Belichick is his own entity, but when I think back to Bill Parcells, he was a master at dealing with the media. I mean, he on the one hand, he called them subversive from within and they were commies and everything else. But on the other hand, he had this ability to sit down on a Friday afternoon with a handful of members of the media and just be a regular guy and talk ball. And I kind of get the sense that Mike Vrabel, to Teddy's point, is going to be very similar.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question to Kevin's original point about like sort of he's a ball buster. I mean, bring your heart at when you go to the press conferences, because having dealt with Mike like I did, not only as a player, but then as a coach, if you choose the wrong word, and it doesn't even have to be like, oh, that's a mistake. It's just like, you meant to say it this way and you said it this way, he'll seize on that word. Like he won't answer your question. Now, why would you say that? Well, what brings you to that? Why would you like, and you're like, well, wait, you're not answering the question, but that's just the nature of the beast. And I've told the story to a bunch of people on the beat. Like I witnessed him multiple times. Just basically tell the reporter that question was bleep, like, yeah, what is that? What do you know what? You always ask crappy questions. Like, yeah, whatever. And then, I don't know, 5 minutes later, the same person would ask a question, he'd answer it. Or the next day, hey, I was in a bad mood. You caught the brunt of it. We good? We're good. Okay, bingo. And I'll give you my favorite. So during COVID, obviously everything was virtual, right? So they were one of my teams. So anytime they had a press conference, I was dialing up the thing right here in this spot, and I was listening to the press conference and asking questions or whatever. And everybody did it a little differently during COVID. So they would have the chat alongside the screen, and you just had to type in the chat, hey, I got a question for Mike. And then Robbie, who's the PR guy, Robbie would go in the chat. It would say, hey, Buck, and then Giardi, and whatever. So, like, all right, Buck went, and then you just jump in and you'd ask your question. And you'd see Vrabel every once in a while. He'd be like, talking, but he'd be looking down, and you could see like something was going on. And then in the chat up would pop up Mike Vrabel. Joe, that question sucked. Like, just, yeah. And you're just like, I mean, he just has that thing about him. And it might, look, some people will get rubbed the wrong way by it. I guarantee you that there will be points in time when the people that are constantly asking questions there get on the wrong side of Mike, and you're just going to have to deal with it. But as I said, the thing is, I think if you're fair, shows up the next day, you got a question, he's going to answer it, so that to me, that's like kind of part of the charm of Mike Vrabel and what it's going to be like in these press conferences.
So Kevin covered me when I was a head coach at Norwood, and I had a couple of interactions with him. So you're battle tested. You should be ready for this, because remember, I'm the same guy who called you down from the stands to ask you who the F you think you are questioning our offense. So.
At Norwood High School. No, I'm honestly expecting short
Mike's
jokes.
alma mater. He knows.
Yeah.
He knows how serious we take it.
I'm expecting short jokes from Vrabel. I'm already ready. I covered his kid, so I have at least a conversation starter. if nothing else. Going to OC, obviously a huge conversation. I think DC is honestly, it's not as big, obviously, but it's going to be big. But where do you think he's going OC? Is it McDaniels or, is there a name we're not talking about? I've thought he would try to call Bill O'Brien. I don't think Bill would ever take it, but I do think he'd pick up the phone. They've both sort of gushed over each other this last week. But where do you think they're heading?
So I think Tommy Reese is an interesting name. Obviously, when Mike went to Cleveland, he was doing a bunch of different things this past year, but he sort of, for a while there, he was in the tight end room. And then I think there was dissatisfaction with the offensive line coach, who, by the way, got fired as soon as the season was over. And Mike ended up assuming a lot of those duties long before Dickerson was canned. So there's a relationship there with Tommy. Tommy's obviously, he would have been the head coach at North Carolina had Bill Belichick not got it. At least that's those are multiple reports that said he was the guy. Interviewed twice for it. He's called plays at a bunch of different places. My only reticence with Tommy is almost to the same point of what we just went through with the head coach and two technically first-time coordinators, although obviously Alex has had the title for a long time, but hadn't called plays since 2009, is that, man, do I really want to roll the dice on someone who's unproven in that role at this level? Tommy also hasn't coached quarterbacks at this level, obviously played quarterback in college, but hasn't coached the position at this level. So that's another part of it where I'm just like, okay, would have been nice if he had a little bit more experience in that regard. Josh McDaniels' name keeps coming up for obvious reasons. He's still being paid by the Raiders. That certainly doesn't hurt his track record with developing quarterbacks here and some of the production that he got, even able to cobble together a semi-decent offense with Cam Newton, who couldn't throw the ball by the time he got to New England. And again, wasn't a good year by any stretch of the imagination, but they had some moments where you're like, oh, okay. Like he incorporated some things that Cam did well and kept them competitive in some games that they probably didn't belong to be in. So he, to me, makes a lot of sense because obviously between the quarterback development, the quarterback coaching, there's we know the resume, the accomplished playbook that he has. And I think he's shown that he can adapt. And I think that's probably the one thing that people look at and say, well, the play calls were long and they had to shorten them and this and the other thing. He's adapted over time. He had to adapt for a bunch of different quarterbacks and was able to, again, got the best out of Mac Jones in that half a season, at least his rookie year. So he's a name that comes to mind. I think Nick Caley will come up again. And Nick's done a nice job with the Rams and his role has grown there. Obviously was their top choice last year and didn't take the job. And part of it was because the Rams, they like him a lot and they gave him more duties and more money and more responsibility. He's got a young family and they've settled in nicely out there. So I'm not saying that couldn't happen. I think he'll be a phone call there, but same sort of thing with him, hasn't called plays. So he doesn't have that part of his resume. So I kind of just look back on it and go, second year quarterback. I want him to take the leap. I don't want to mess this thing up. And at least with Josh, hey, it's pretty good. It's been pretty good for a long time. It was great for periods, obviously, with Tom, which you have to factor in. But I think that's probably the thing that makes the most sense to me. And maybe it's not the sexy, like, ooh, they went young or they did this or they went to a different system. But I think Josh is pretty adaptable. And I think that sort of consistency and the idea that he could be here for 4 or 5 years, whatever, because he's probably not getting another head coaching job, makes it also attractive that you don't have to worry about that guy's going to leave. Drake has an awesome year this year. We're going to look for another offensive coordinator. We got the guy in place. And maybe this time with the offensive coordinator, they can start to work a succession plan of their own. Here's a young assistant, Josh. He's going to be stuck to you, for the next 3 years. And unlike Bill, who didn't necessarily show people what he was all about, show him what you're all about. Teach him how this goes and try to get him in the best position possible so that he's either ready to go someplace else or if it's time for you to go, he's ready to go. And we kind of keep the same playbook and the same verbiage.
No, and I agree with you wholeheartedly, Mike. I think you brought up a great point there that I've certainly thrown out in recent days, and that is McDaniels would make a lot of sense on a lot of levels. And take the name cachet out of it, though. I think the biggest reason he makes a lot of sense is stability at the position. He more than likely isn't going to get another opportunity, realistically speaking, although you never know with the NFL. But realistically speaking, he's probably going to be here 4 or 5 years. And as you know, when you hire a defensive coach, if you hire even a first-time coordinator and they have success in year one, a la Bobby Slowick last year, they have success in year two, bang. Now, all of a sudden, they're interviewing, they could be gone, and you could be turning over that position every 2 years. And so it's a lot easier in many ways if you're an offensive head coach, because defensive coordinators, by and large, don't get hired as much as offensive coordinators do. They tend to stick around longer. So I think McDaniels, in that regard, would make a lot of sense. And I know a lot of people have said, well, I mean, but can you run this offense successfully without Tom Brady? And I would point to 2008 with Castle. He was the OC. You mentioned 2021 with Mac Jones. He's had success without Tom Brady here. Obviously, isn't at the same level of success outside of New England, but he has certainly had it here. Two-part question here for you. One, what do you think they do at defensive coordinator? I know Shane Bowen's name, who was his DC, he was with the Giants last year. He's come up, obviously. But do you also, the second part of my question is, do you think he retains some staff? And if so, who do you think potentially stays?
Yeah, it's interesting because there are a bunch of guys whose contracts have expired. And Harf, obviously the last week has not been easy for them. And we don't talk about those guys because you focus on the head coach and then you're immediately on to who's the next coach going to be. I think there are plenty of good coaches on that staff. I mean, I think Mike Pellegrino has done a really good job as the cornerbacks coach for multiple years. I know his contract is up. Is he someone that they want to keep around? Mike, as he talked today, doesn't have there's not a lot of ties to some of the people here. A lot of the guys he hasn't crossed paths with. I thought Brian Belichick, you talk about like not necessarily having a position that improved other than quarterback, which basically going from Jacoby to Drake is just the overall ceiling of the player and then getting sort of that ability. Del Pettis did a nice job this year. No one wants to talk about Del Pettis, right? He's the third or fourth safety, but like you talk about a young player who actually showed signs of development this year. Del Pettis was someone who showed signs of development. That's Brian Belichick's, gig. And I know Kyle Duggar didn't have a very good year. And obviously Jabril had the off the field stuff. And then when he came back, he wasn't right and ended up back on IR and not playing. But, Jabril was his guy last year. And he did a nice job getting Jabril to, I think, what we all thought was a Pro Bowl type level player last year. So he's someone that I would consider. After that, boy, it feels like everybody's, obviously if you could convince Alex Van Pelt, if that's something he wants to be the quarterback's coach, or TC McCartney to stay and be the quarterback's coach, I think a lot of people look at TC very favorably, both in the organization and around the league. Then those are things you might consider, but I'm sure Mike has his people and guys that he's got the list already made up. I went back and looked at some of his old Tennessee staffs. I think you'll have to look at maybe someone like Tim Kelly, who is the tight ends coach now for the Giants. He was his OC the last year in Tennessee. Tim previously worked with the Texans under O'Brien, so there's plenty of shared history there. Defensively, this is a harder one. I thought Bowen was going to get fired. I'm still not completely convinced he's not, even though thus far the smoke signals out of New York are that no, he's staying. But John Mara made it pretty clear that he hated their defense last year, maybe more than anything. And obviously their entire year was garbage, but he was really pointed in his comments. I'm sick of seeing teams march up and down the field on us. So while they may be signaling we're good now, let's pump the brakes on that being totally official yet. The logical name to me after him is Terrell Williams, who was the defensive line coach in Tennessee. There's only one problem with that. In fact, I think he might be at the head of the list if Shane is not available, is that he's now with the Lions. He's now the run game coordinator and the D-line coach for the Lions. The Lions obviously seem prepared to make a long run. Even if they're not, Aaron Glenn likely going to be one of the hires here in the head coaching cycle. And I just wonder if Aaron gets the job, is the immediate elevation Terrell into that role as the DC of the Detroit Lions, which I don't care if you're loyal to Mike Vrabel. They were an awesome team last year. They're 15-2 this year in the number one seed. That might be a tough gig to walk away from and say, I'll go start with a rebuilding program that's been in the dumps for the last couple of years versus we're already on the top of the mountain. And if we do it again, we have another good year. Maybe next year I'm the guy people are talking about as a head coach, as opposed to now I got to go rebuild something in New England. And if we do well 2 or 3 years down the line, maybe I'm starting to get phone calls, but I can do it pretty much immediately if I have the same sort of success in Detroit.
Mike, this time of year, obviously Senior Bowl coming up, and all the college all-star games for years, if not, a decade plus. The Patriots sort of not ignored it, but I guess for lack of a better term, didn't take it as seriously as some franchises. How hands-on and how involved do you think Vrabel will be in the first, sort of college scouting, I guess, process coming up here?
I think he got a real good taste for it in Cleveland. I think it was part of the piece that you read in The Athletic from Zach Rosenblatt a couple weeks ago in sort of preparation for this cycle, and having the ability to sit with Andrew Berry, the GM there, and sort of see their process. As he said, they let me in on their grades and their system and how they do things. And like, I think when you heard Mike today talking about all the different things that he missed, I think that's a part that he sort of added to his game now. That's like, ooh, I kind of like this aspect of it too. And finding players wouldn't surprise me in the least bit. And I know he's got a lot of work to do, so we'll see where they are in terms of coaching staff hires, whether this is a 2-week process or a month and a half process. I don't know, but like, it wouldn't shock me if at the Senior Bowl, when I'm sitting down there in Mobile, Alabama, on those aluminum bleachers, that I see Mike Vrabel walking the field at some point. Like, because I think he's into that part of it. I think he loves you even saw it like a couple years ago. He's working out Keon White, right? Like, he gets in. This is his thing. He likes that aspect of it. And quite frankly, we saw Bill at times, and obviously making more of the big tour of the schools of Alabama and Georgia and some of his buddies, but like being on the field and sort of directing things. I think that's Mike. Mike wants to be involved. I want to feel this guy's power. Like, I'll pick up the blocking sled. We'll see what happens, So yeah, I think he's going to be definitely intimately involved. And especially, again, going back to one of our original points of conversation about like roster control over the draft. Like, well, if you're going to have that sort of sway and power, then you better be rolling the sleeves up and getting a good look at what you could possibly be drafting at 4 and early in the second round and so on and so forth.
And I wanted to ask you about that real quick, Mike. And when I look at this situation with him, and I know we kind of touched on this earlier, when I look at the setup right now in regard to the front office and him, and I don't believe he takes this job if he wasn't given some assurances that he's going to have a role in the personnel decision-making process. I kind of liken it to what San Francisco has with Lynch and Shanahan, where I could see a scenario where Wolf might be in charge of picking the players, but Vrabel's in charge of the final 53-man roster. Do you see a scenario like that here?
Yeah, completely. And I think that's a scenario in which the head coach is very much in power there, but John has his role and has fit nicely into the role, and that relationship has worked pretty well. Obviously Kyle doesn't have to worry about like, oh, Ayuk doesn't want to practice today because of his contract. Like, he has to worry about it on the field stuff, but like, that's your gig. You figure that part of it out. So yeah, I think there's definitely going to be a little bit of a divide in that regard, but there's again, without them coming out and saying it, there's no way he's taking this job if he's just the head coach and you're going to tell me what players I get and what players I have to, put on my roster on game day. Like, I don't see that. I think there were too many options at play for him in this cycle where he could call his shot, so if he, despite having the warm feelings about this place and having the structure that he wanted in terms of got a good young quarterback that you can build around, like the power is definitely an important element for him.
Mike, we've heard a lot, recently heard a lot about, sorry, I'll back up. Going back to Teddy Bruschi the other day, he talked about ownership and really some of the comments he made about, some people might have to take a back seat or, I'm paraphrasing, but one, what did you make of Jonathan Kraft being there today and not at Jerod Mayo's last year? And two, do you think Teddy was specifically talking about Jonathan and Robin Glazer in that scenario?
So I don't know how closely Teddy's involved here anymore. Like, obviously knows plenty of people and whatnot, but like in terms of the relationships that he might have with some of the people in the front office, it's a lot different than it was when he was here as a player. And he's been removed from it for a long time now. So I don't know if he specifically knows sort of the inner workings of what's happening there. I think sometimes what happens with the media, in particular, sometimes the national media, is it's just word starts to trickle out, and one person tells another person it's the game of telephone. It gets back to you, and Bill keeps dogging Robin Glazer on his interviews, so I'm gonna put a little veiled shot in there about that or whatever. Like, I don't know how much he's involved in it, but I think there's I think to the overall general point of it, I think there are people in the front office that were much like Jerod Mayo, out over their skis, and that's an important part and an element for Mike coming in now is again sort of okay, who's good at what they do and who's not, and who do I want around the program, and who do I have to keep an eye on while they're here? Like, do I trust them? And that's an important element of it too. Like, it's kind of crazy to think, but like having Ryan Cowden there is an extra set of ears and eyes there is probably a good thing in terms of, hey, I don't know about this person, or I don't know what's going on here. There's a lot of private conversations that are happening here, and you might just want to be wary about it. So that's something I think that you have to, unfortunately, have to pay attention to. It seems like sometimes it's like a glorified high school, right? Like, the kids, like, what are we doing? Like we're adults here. We should be able to figure it out, but it's a lot of money at play. There's a lot of ego at play, and it's just sort of how it happens, unfortunately.
Yeah, and unfortunately, and you know this all too well, Mike, there's a lot of paranoia in the football world. Doesn't matter what the level is. Loyalty matters to coaches, and there's a lot of paranoia about loyalty. Who's saying what, especially when things aren't going well. When things aren't going well, you're even more extra sensitive to that. So certainly having Cowden in the front office, I think it's going to be huge for him because in many ways, it'll allow him to focus on football and not worry about, can I trust these people? Yeah, I might be able to trust Elliott, but can I trust the other people in this front office? That'll certainly be a big part of it. I do want to go back to the offensive conversation real quick. And, when you look back at what he did in Tennessee, their best year offensively was 2020. They averaged 30.7 points per game, but cumulatively or collectively, his 6 years there, they averaged about 19.5 points per game. This Patriots roster, as it's currently constituted, is not set up to play the same way he did at Tennessee, or at least wanted to play at Tennessee, where he had Derrick Henry, A.J. Brown, Ryan Tannehill. Do you see him wanting to play that way here? You have Ramondre Stevenson, who's a big back. He's not Derrick Henry. Mm-hmm. But do you see that same philosophy here, or do you see them possibly opening things up more? He talked about that today, about playing to the talent you have in their strengths. Do you see a similar style of play, or do you think they go in a different direction here?
Well, I think Mike's always going to be a little bit old school. I think he's always going to love to have the, sort of, we're going to be the physically more dominant team. And, the best way to sort of exert your will on someone is to run it right down their throat. And as we've talked about a million times, and to stop the run. That said, I think he's been pigeonholed in a wrong, I don't think it's necessarily fair is not the right word, but like, so you have Derrick Henry, and Derrick Henry starts to ascend as this player. Are you not supposed to run him? Are you supposed to? Are you supposed to? No, you know what? The league is throwing the ball, so we just got to throw the ball, and we're only going to run Derrick 15, 16 times a game, even though Derrick tends to get stronger as the game goes on, and we talk about unicorn, which has been a big word the last few years, right? Everyone likes to throw on unicorn. That dude's a unicorn, because that dude right now, with the amount of touches that he gets, he's supposed to have. His career was supposed to be over about 3 years ago, and he rushed for 1,900 yards this year, and he's still going strong. So I think Mike realized we have a big, strong, physical offensive line, particularly the left side of that offensive line. Taylor Lewan in his prime was a Pro Bowl, all-pro caliber player. Ben Jones is a terrific center. Roger Saffold was on that offensive line. They had good pieces. We're gonna be able to physically control you up front. And then what's the quarterback do best? Well, Marcus Mariota, not a, obviously not the kind of quarterback people thought he was going to be coming out in the draft. They make the switch to Tannehill. They got the best production out of Tannehill of his entire career. They got the best play out of Ryan Tannehill for 3 years. Play action, because people creeping up, trying to stop Derrick Henry. And to their credit, Ryan Tannehill liked big-bodied receivers. He likes guys with big catch radius. He likes big frames. So they went out and they drafted A.J. Brown. They signed Julio Jones. Even at the end, not that DeAndre Hopkins is a big dude, but the catch radius of that player is one of the best that we've ever seen, right? So, okay, maybe we wanted to play a little bit more like, say Josh McDaniels did with a smaller slot and that sort of thing. No, this quarterback wants this, so let's go get him that, and let's try to bring out the best of him that way. And again, for 3 years, they were able to do that. So I think Mike is smart enough to realize the league has changed. He's also smart enough to realize, when I look at this roster right now, who's my best player on offense? Drake May. Okay, if we got to throw it 40 times a game, we're going to throw it 40 times a game. I don't think he's so stubborn that he's going to say, hey, Josh, or whoever the offensive coordinator is, just keep running it into the line when Drake May is our best player. Why would you take the ball out of their best player's hands?
So on Patriots Unfiltered today, there was some fullback talk. Do you think this is going to be a fullback offense again? And sort of a two-parter as well. We've heard a lot about the analytics. When he was in Cleveland, he spent a lot of time sort of learning that. But you just said he's more of an old school guy. Do you think he's going to go more with the gut, or will he be able to find a good balance between those two?
Yeah, I think that's part of his growth as a coach, right? I think if you talk to people in Tennessee, Mike was conservative on those, fourth down situations. Conservative, do we go for it or do we kick the field goal here? Conservative, do we attempt a long field goal, go for it or punt? Those sorts of things. And he tended to lean towards the safer bet in those regards. Did he learn something about what that was all about? Cleveland obviously is probably at the forefront of the analytics sort of movement in football. What did he learn there? What did he pick up? I still think when we talk about all the numbers, I still think that comes down to, I know what the analyst can tell you. I know what the guy can buzz into your headset. Evan Rothstein, who was Jerod's guy, can buzz in and say, hey, 56% chance that we go for it here. We get it. 56% chance we go for it. We end up scoring a touchdown. Okay, but is my right guard dealing with a sore shoulder and can't block the guy in front of him? Has my left side not been able to pick up twists the entire season, as we saw? Like, are there issues like that where you can say, I don't really give a damn what your analyst numbers say. I know what my eyes tell me, and my eyes tell me either we can whoop this team up front and get what we need to do. We can protect the quarterback, get what we need to do. This guy can get open. We can get it to him. Or, you know what? We're better off punting and hoping our defense can do it, or we're better off kicking the long field goal here and just saying, all right, we got some points out of this. We don't come out of it with nothing. So I think that's part of it. I think one of the things that we have to watch with Mike is sort of his evolution as a coach and having the year off. And what did he learn from it? What did he look back on himself and say, this is what I did well, and this is what I didn't do well? And I think that's all going to be part of, with Jerod, we had to watch it from week to week. Like he's never done this before. Okay, well, he did this. Is that how he's going to be going forward? Well, the next week he did something different. All right, is that what's the balance here? With Mike, there's a track record, but now it's what's the adjustment to what he was before?
And just your thoughts on the fullback as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't necessarily think you have to have a fullback, right? Like, I think you can have someone who's capable of doing the job in certain areas. Now, if they're going to fully embrace the idea that, hey, we're going to be a lot more two back and it is going to be some I formation stuff and we want to have the fullback involved. Okay, I get that. But if you're talking about someone who's, hey, it's 3 plays in the course of a game, then the 3 plays are more likely going to be someone like we saw City So this year, like something like that, where does it make sense to waste a roster spot on someone who is not going to have that much of an impact? Or again, with the expanded practice squad, maybe that's where the place where you put the practice squad guy. And then if you get into a scenario in which you say, you know what, this is a muck it up game. We're going to run it down your throat game. He's coming up this week and you're going to see him 12, 15 plays in this game.
Yeah, I think that you're going to probably see them, to your point, Mike, use a third tight end as that move.
Yeah.
Where they can line up at fullback, play on the backside. I don't see them, unless you do what Baltimore or the Chargers do with Pat Ricard and Matlock. You're not going to use a fullback because, like you said, it's a roster spot.
Yeah, and those guys are kind of freaks too, right? I mean, we're talking about dudes that are like 280 to 300 pounds that still run pretty well and actually, catch the ball coming out of the backfield. Like there are not too many guys like that. I don't think those are just guys you just, oh yeah, there's one over here. No, you're gonna have to groom those guys and find the right skill set to sort of make that work for you.
Yeah, no, you bring up a great point. Fullbacks aren't prevalent in college anymore. It's not like that you're going to be going out there and evaluating them in this upcoming draft. Speaking of the upcoming draft, real quick, I know we're all going to be busy here. I'd love to have, we'd love to have you on again, but we know we're all busy. They have the number 4 pick in the draft. Throw your GM hat on for 1 second. What do you do with that pick if you're the decision maker?
So this is, this is not considered a very top end heavy draft, right? Some people will tell you there's like 3 legit blue chippers. Some will tell you there's 5, 6.
I'm in the 3 camp.
Yeah, I'm not. I'm more leaning in that direction. We talk about obviously the need for offensive line help, and that's something that Vrabel talked about. Like we want to be able to control the offense, the line, and it's clear that that's going to be an area of focus for them. Well, the 2 best guys, the LSU kid and the Texas kid, everyone I've talked to, there's a lot more of those guys are guards than they are tackles. So same thing. If you evaluate him as a left tackle, and that's what they turn out to be, then God bless, amen, great hit, but a lot of people think those are guards, and I don't know that you could draft a guard at number 4 overall. So to me, they don't have enough blue chip talent. They don't have enough high-end talent. So you know what? If it's Abdul Carter sitting there at 4, the rusher from Penn State is, I think rush is a need for them, but is it like the most important? Probably not. But you know what? He's something we don't have, and there aren't any other guys like him in the draft. That's the guy I'm taking. Or if you sit there and say, hey, maybe Travis Hunter falls to 4, the way things work because of the quarterback demand. Do you look at Travis Hunter and say, we think he's a real receiver. We think he's a 1 or a 2. Is that what you do there? If he's a corner, now am I doubling up on corner? I already have Gonzo, and not that having 2 elite talents at corner is a problem, but then maybe is it switch the gears and is it Mason Graham, where, okay, maybe he's not the elite athlete, but for 10 years, you plug him into the middle of that defense. And I think we all look at too, that just the Christian Barmore thing is very much up in the air. Very, obviously the most important thing is his health. That is the absolute most important thing. And thankfully there was guaranteed money involved in his deal. And so he made some money if he doesn't get to come back. But like, I don't know that you can definitively say he's going to be back, or when he does come back, like, oh, we don't have to worry about that ever again. As we just saw this year, comes back. And then, a few games later, he has to go back on IR. So that's a sneaky position of need, because you want, and you talk about the guy that you have in place now, and Mike Vrabel, he wants to be physical. Is that something where they would say that's the best player? He might not be the best athlete, but like, we know that he's a starter from day one, and he's going to be an above average player to a damn good player for the next 8 to 10 years. And is that something you just say, we're not going to trade back, we're not going to file more assets, I want to plug this guy in, put him right there, let's go play ball?
Yeah, and to go back to the offensive lineman, that's going to be the question with the top 2 guys. With Campbell, It's going to be arm length. With Banks, it's going to be overall length. I mean, you're talking about a guy that's 6'4", 320, and while he's athletic, you got to have length out there to cut the edge off, especially in this day and age where teams are playing wide 5s. It's a real question, Mike, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I think it's going to be something that's going to be debated all spring. But unless you're willing to trade down, because then you could stomach drafting one of those guys if, let's say, you're at 8 or 9.
Right.
But to your point, at 4, you got to walk out of this draft if you stick and pick at 4 with either an Abdul Carter, a Hunter, dare I say a Will Johnson. I know some people don't love him as much as they did last summer, but I still think he's probably the other blue chip guy in this class. But I think, to me, look, if Abdul Carter is sitting there, and I think edge rush is a big need for them, you can make the argument it's definitely a top 3 need for them. You need impact players. He could certainly be that for them.
Yeah, I mean, again, I just keep going back. You start looking at rosters, and you even look at like someone like Carolina, who they have the worst record in the league over the last 2 years. You have the second worst record in the league, and you start looking at some of the younger players on the roster, and you go, they got more guys than you do, right? They got more guys have potential to reach a higher ceiling than some of the guys you do. So to me, it's all about, I know people stockpile the picks, take more. Man, if you're hell bent and convinced that this guy can make an impact for you, then do it. And to your point, if you decide, okay, that offer's too good, but we're not moving back too far, we're moving to 7, we're moving to 8. And then if we draft Banks and he turns out to be a left guard, but he turns out to be a damn good left guard, okay, then it's sort of like Quentin Nelson with the Colts, right? He was 5th or 6th in the draft. Been a really good, was an awesome player, had some injuries, now sort of back to being an awesome player again. And then you pick up a 2nd rounder or a 3rd rounder, and who knows, maybe you throw one of those darts and you finally hit on a receiver, or you hit on a pass rusher there, then it makes it more palatable. But to me, I really have a hard time wanting to go too far back in this draft. There's too many unanswered questions. I don't want just good. I'm trying to find great. You need great.
All right, Mike. Well, that's one for me. It's not an easy one, but who wins a championship first, Bill Belichick or Mike Vrabel?
Ooh. I'm gonna just take Vrabel because he's 49 and Billy's gonna be 73. And
Fair enough.
I mean, I'm really interested to see this. I'm done with talking to the Belichick and the media stuff and all the stuff he's been doing. I don't really care about any of it, but I am intrigued to see him coach because this is a different challenge. I think he had a harder time reaching some of the younger players, as I was referencing earlier, during the latter part of his tenure. I think a lot of people don't care that you have the 6 Super Bowl rings or the 8, whatever he claims he's got, on his boat as the defensive coordinator too. But I'm curious to see if he can reach these 18, 19-year-olds. And I'm curious to see, like, obviously he's a brainiac and he's put together some of the greatest game plans you've ever seen and utilizing guys in different ways and having, the constant like changing of the scheme and the system for this week to that week. Can you do that in college? Can you do it with 18, 19-year-old kids? I'm fascinated by it. I mean, it'd be kind of cool if they went on a little bit of a run there. It really would be, because look, for as much as it was time for him to go here at the end, I mean, you can't deny what he was able to accomplish all these years. And yeah, but more Brady than Belichick. If you want to get into that conversation, whatever. All I know is 6 Super Bowl rings, constantly in the AFC Championship game, and constantly being like, they were on it. Like, he had them on. That plan was crazy. That was something. Like, what they did there. Like, there's a lot of those in the Bill Belichick resume that very few, if any, have. So I'm really curious to see it. But based on Mike being 49 years old, and I think he's a really smart dude, I'll give it to Mike. But I'm real curious about what happens with Bill.
No, I am too. And if nothing else, Bill O'Brien versus Bill Belichick in the ACC championship. People might not care around here. I think you'd get some buzz if that ever happened.
Oh yeah, that'd be pretty cool, right? And it was funny. I was thinking back to sort of Vrabel, and Vrabel holds a grudge, which, as we know, Bill Belichick holds a grudge. I also am a card-carrying member of the Grudge Holders Club. But like in 2018, in that first meeting between the Patriots and the Titans, and McDaniels, Bill, they call the freaking throwback play to Brady. Brady not only doesn't catch the ball, but hurts his knee. And that was where for 6 weeks, he had the knee problem that they kept saying he didn't have a knee problem. And I kept telling everybody, no, he did something, sprained his MCL. And then what does Vrabel do? You're going to run that with Tom Brady? How about we do a throwback with Marcus Mariota? Oh, that worked, didn't it? Huh? Like, that was to me like the classic Vrabel, like, pick a finger and it's not this one and it's not this one. Like, you think you're smart, Bill, but I'm smart too. And I got a little edge to me. I'll get you. I'll zing you.
Yeah. No, it's awesome. I mean, and that's, and I'd be remiss because I would love to ask Mike if he even remembers this real quick. I know we got a couple minutes here, but in 2004, I was doing a Monday Night Football show at the Charlie Horse in West Bridgewater, me and Ryan Russillo. And we're doing a Monday Night Football show. Make a long story short, Mike Vrabel, wife, and his sons walk in for dinner. And right before they walked in, they had lost that weekend. I forget who they were playing. Make a long story short, I'm talking about their inability to set the edge, stop the run. And I made the point. I said, Mike Vrabel had a hard time setting the edge in this game. They might have played Pittsburgh. So they got to be better at setting the edge. So we had an intern. Intern comes over and says, hey, Mike Vrabel and his family are here. We should try to get him on the show. And Russillo's like, I wouldn't bother him. They're eating dinner. I'm like, it's not a bad idea. I go, well, let's offer him a gift card. See if he'll come on. Kid goes over. About 5 minutes later, comes back. He goes, said he would love to come on, but since he can't set an edge, he'll pass. And I hear all these stories about Vrabel. I'm like, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
That's Mike Vrabel in the nutshell. I don't think he'll remember this, but it's stuck with me forever because it's classic Vrabel. Final question here for you tonight, Mike. And again, thank you for taking the time, my friend. Greatly appreciated. Always great talking ball with you. Looking at your crystal ball, what are reasonable expectations for the 2025 Patriots under Mike Vrabel in his first year?
Well, so put it this way. My feeling is, had they had a more competent coaching staff this year and a better leader, that they would have won a couple more games. So 6-11. okay, now he's going to be here. Now you have the 4th pick and all the 117 or 130, whatever the salary cap money is. And again, there's a reason most of those guys get to free agency. They're not as great as we think they are, but obviously this roster needs an overhaul, and you should get better just strictly based on some of the numbers that you can bring in. I'm going to say, let's call it 7-10. That'd be a 3-game improvement from last year. And I think they'll be frisky. I don't think you're going to see too many times where they're getting run out of the building. And we saw, they can talk about all the 1-score games they were in this year. There were also in a lot of 4- and 5-score games as well. And I don't think there are going to be too many of those in the upcoming future for this Patriots team with Mike Vrabel as head coach.
And are they going to burn cash? I know that was Mayo's famous line last year. Are they going to burn cash? But is anybody going to take their cash? That's the more.
Yeah. I think it's one of those things. Like, everybody's like, oh, they're going to get T. Higgins. I'm like, you guys realize there's like 6 teams that have the money to go splurge on T. Higgins, and T. Higgins is going to make. You guys didn't want to pay Calvin Ridley. I know T. Higgins is 4 or 5 years younger. I'm like, but you guys were like, oh, it's a good thing they didn't get Calvin Ridley. I'll tell you this: if Tennessee puts Calvin Ridley up for bid, I'm trying to trade for Calvin Ridley. And I don't think Calvin Ridley's an awesome player, just like I didn't think he was an awesome player last year. But now all of a sudden it's basically 1 year and $25 million guaranteed. Or do I want to give T. Higgins $5 and $150 and $85 guaranteed? And then you're going to say, like, oh, is it really worth it? He might not be. But you know what? T. Higgins, like a lot of these guys, especially at that age, you get the free agency, man, you're always going to get overpaid. So it'll be an interesting one, because I think Drake gives them some cachet with some of these guys, and having someone established like Vrabel will also, I think, help. But I still think you're going to have to overpay. You're 4-13. You're 4-13. A lot of guys are going to look at the roster and go, "Dude, that roster's terrible. How much do they offer me? Oh, they got to offer me $3 million more a year, and then I'll consider." And so we talk about it's the suck tax, right? You got to pay the suck tax. They're going to have to pay the suck tax at least for a little while, and hopefully they can get a couple high end players in here, and then sort of do the, go back to 2000 when Belichick signed like 18 guys, 19 guys, like just a bunch of mid-level veteran type guys that instead of having to run, not that Christian, I just bring him up because he was meant to be a special teamer and he had to play full-time linebacker for him, where maybe all of a sudden, instead of having to go there, you've got somebody solid who started games before and is a little bit more stout. And you say, we plug him in, we're a better football team for it. We plug this guy in here, we're a better football team for it. Maybe we get a couple of veteran receivers if we can't get the high-end receiver who are better than what we've brought in the past. And all of a sudden, again, there's just a little bit more to deal with for opposing teams, and you're a little bit better. And then you just got to hope that some of these, like Ronnie Stanley is a name that comes up often. Now they're going to have to do the medicals on him because his body has been a disaster for like 3 years until this season. But like, if someone like that pops free and you like the medicals and you can go, hey, well, whatever the term is, 5 years, but it's really a 2-year deal, then you can really upgrade yourself on the offensive line. Because when you start looking at the offensive line, it's a couple good interior players. The outside guys, not awesome. So they're once again in a spot where maybe the draft isn't awesome at tackle and neither is free agency, but what's your foremost need? Tackle.
Yeah. And I encourage any guy, any kid growing up that's 6'4", 6'5", or bigger, learn to play offensive tackle, because you can make a lot of money someday. Mike, I want to say thank you for taking the time, my friend. It's always great to see you. Always great to talk football with you, and we'd love to do this with you again soon.
Anytime, guys. Yeah, I appreciate you having me on. A lot of fun to talk about it. And it feels like for the first time in a couple years, again, we haven't seen the product on the field. We don't know who they're going to sign or whatnot, but it feels like there's a little bit of like, ooh, they might be relevant again. And that's, I think, like after covering it for all those years when they were not only relevant, but they were the very best, it'd be nice to just get back into the picture a little bit. And not that I mind 1 o'clock games, but an 8 o'clock game here or there because you're a better football team, that might be nice too.
Yeah, I feel like we're going to be at a couple of those next year for sure.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that'll do it for this week's episode of the New England Football Show. For Mike Giardi, Kevin Stone, I'm John Serenitas. Till next week. Peace.
Yeah.